In the 11th chapter of Mark's Gospel, we find the beginning at the 1st through the 11th verse, the day of the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it,' and will send it back here immediately." They went away and found the colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heavens." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. We've always labeled this day the Triumphant Entry into Jerusalem. The roads to Bethany and Bethphage, you come out of Bethphage and towards Bethany, and they kind of converge, and then just past the place where they converge is the Mount of Olives, and from the Mount of Olives you proceed down the valley and up the short rise into Jerusalem. Jesus rides into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. And the reason the disciples are allowed to take the donkey is that at least one person recognizes that he's Lord and has need of it and has right to it. So at the very least, there is one person on this day who recognizes the lordship of Jesus. The disciples lay their cloaks on the back of the donkey, and the people place cloaks in the road and palm branches and in front of Jesus, and he moves towards Jerusalem. It really is a short distance from the merger of those roads to the Mount of Olives, down across the Kidron Valley and up the short hill to the temple gate. The Mount of Olives provides what has been considered by most to be probably the most beautiful view of Jerusalem. You can sit on the Mount of Olives and look across the valley and see the temple in front of you, the first and largest element, and then stretched out behind it, the whole city. Jesus had often come here on other occasions and sat with his disciples and taught them all kinds of lessons as they looked at the temple, as they looked at the city. With the crowds coming in for the festival of Passover at the end of the week, the roads leading to Jerusalem were already crowded. The arrival of Jesus probably just made a little bit more of a circus environment to leading up to this festival. Like many of the days, there would be not enough room in Jerusalem for he and his disciples, and so they would return to Bethany, a neighboring hamlet, a bedroom community for the busy Jerusalem community. When Jesus finally finishes his short ride on that donkey and he arrives at the temple, it says that he took his time and he looked around at everything. The temple ground isn't as big as a piece of property that we have here, but it does take a little bit of time to look around and to see everything, and Jesus takes his time and looks at everything. And that's all it says he does. And then he says that it's being late in the day, he and the disciples return to Bethany. They turn around and go back across the Kidron Valley and up the Mount of Olives. You know, the distance is about here to the high school, folks. We're not talking about a long way, okay? Here to the high school across the street's all it is. Once they arrived there at the top, they kind of made a little more westerly turn, and Bethany is just a short distance. During the entire time this coming week, Jesus will be in Bethany. But what is the value of you and I remembering the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem? You know, we do this every year. There's always kids bringing palm branches down, and it makes for a great story. I mean, you know, we add all kinds of decorations to the church, and a lot of people come on this day knowing that Stephanie's going to put together a whole lot more with Bob's help than they would have done some other days. It's always a great day to show up. The kids are all excited about it because they actually get to take part. You know, if you're a little kid, this is a great day because most of the time you come to church and what do? You sit and you get to go away, and, you know, you leave your mom and dad alone. And on this day, they get to march down the aisles, and they get to swing palms and turn around in circles and do all kinds of wonderful and great things. And for them, it's a great day. The pomp and the ceremony is one of those things that they really enjoy. But as a college student said to me one time, so what? So what? Palm Sunday always reminds me of two things. One is very sad, and the other one is acceptable, I guess, to me. Palm Sunday always reminds me of just how shallow we are as people. There's very little depth that holds us to anything for very long. Given the right circumstance, we are quick to change our attitudes, our positions, even our relationships with people. I've met way too many folks who at some time or another have discovered that their husband or wife was unfaithful in the past, and now all of a sudden they can no longer live with them. I've watched people in politics say one thing and it get a bad review, and the next time they speak in public, it's an entirely different approach. I have heard children and people tell me that one whisper was made in the halls of school or in the grocery store, and now everybody looks at them differently. On Palm Sunday, everybody welcomed Jesus with the excitement of a coming Messiah, a conquering hero. The answer to every need they had just walked into town. And yet come Friday, that same group of folks will have so radically changed their attitude about everything that as a mob they would cry out for him to be crucified. The emotions of humanity aren't a reliable source from which you and I make life-changing decisions. Our emotions are governed by so many things that have absolutely nothing to do with the decision that we make. This Palm Sunday has always led me to be a lot more forgiving of people. Everybody is subject to the same kinds of faults. We all sooner or later come to a point where we make a bad decision, and that bad decision just doesn't affect us. It affects other people. And I try to remember that people aren't evil, and they're not bad, and they're not misguided. They're just driven by forces that I cannot imagine and that I don't have to deal with. I ran across a wonderful story of an African writer. In his piece of literature, he talks about sitting beside each person is a pool of tears. Each person we encountered has this pool that goes with them. While we may sit with them for a while, we will never know the depths of pain and suffering that lie within their pool. Only they will know fully what is there. We may hear some of the pain that they share. We may even relate to it because it's similar to the pains that we have known in the past, but we will never fully understand the pain that exists in their pool because their pool of tears is theirs, not ours. How could the crowd on Sunday welcome Jesus as a hero, the Messiah, and then on Friday cry out for crucifixion? people change. People make decisions we don't understand, and they do things we can hardly believe, and that's the nature of humanity. That's our nature, folks. And to be honest, as I look at that, that's the depressing part of Palm Sunday to me. That's the depressing part, is you and I. But inevitably, when I look at Palm Sunday, I also see something else entirely different. While humanity is constantly changing, is constantly in flux, Jesus is like a rock. He doesn't change at all. What he says, he accomplishes. What he promises, he brings about. Remember when we started this journey to Lent this year, we began by talking about Jesus deciding to go to Jerusalem. He told the disciples, he told you and I that he was going to Jerusalem. In Scripture, we see that he sets his face to do it. He doesn't cower as he gets closer and as he understands more clearly what it means. He doesn't hesitate. In fact, in a couple of places, one of the things that we find is, while he travels through Jericho, do you remember in Galilee that he went around Galilee? A place where people knew him and held on to him. And he avoided it because they might have held him back from going to Jerusalem. Jesus told his disciples he was going to Jerusalem. He repeated it to the people over and over again. He talked about the religious leaders who would seek to have him killed. He also told them that he would go to the cross and give up his life for them. He was very clear in his closing conversations over and over again with them to remind them that he would go there. But he also reminded them that in 3 days he would rise. As he had laid down his life, he would most certainly pick his life up. Humanity is in such flux. We are constantly changing. But Jesus speaks the truth. Jesus finishes what he says he will. Jesus does every time exactly what he told us he would do. While humanity is questionable, unstable, and unreliable, when I look at the person of Jesus, he always does exactly what he says he will do. As we come to this Holy Week leading up to Easter, we celebrate the life of this one person who is always steady, always solid, never changing, always doing what he says. The one who is exactly who you and I need to learn to trust. That for me is what's truly great about Palm Sunday. It reminds me again of who I really can place my trust in. As we come to this week leading up to Easter, I'm reminded again of the character of Jesus, of the quality of the life he lived, and I am firmly convinced, more so than ever before, that I made a right decision by putting my trust in him. I have known times in my own life when I have not been reliable. I know that never happened to you, okay? But I know I have made decisions that were not really in my best interest, okay? I can easily remember my yesterdays and count the failures. I have lived long enough around other folks that I am convinced that people will ruin every kind of conceivable relationship we have with humanity. I have watched husbands hurt their wives. I have watched children hurt their fathers. I have watched neighbors who've damaged their relationship with neighbors. People in business who have sacrificed everybody else in order to get ahead. But as I look at this week in the life of Jesus, as I watch him enter Jerusalem, as I listen to all the things he does throughout the week, I am convinced again that he is always the same and that I am always able to trust in him.